Hello everyone, welcome to this edition of AutoShack's Maintenance Motorway. Now the subject of today's video is one of the most common items around which we get questions from our customers. Can you guess? Now if you guessed engine oil, you are 100% correct. But there are so many factors to consider. Brands, viscosities, special additives, and a whole bunch of other stuff you have to consider. In this video, we're going to discuss some engine oil basics. Number 1, what is engine oil? Number 2, what does it do? And number 3, what to look out for when buying engine oil. Hopefully after this video, you have a better understanding of how to pick the right oil for your vehicle.
Now let's talk about what engine oil is. So engine oil is a combination of base oil and additives, okay? And base oil is a product of the crude oil distillation process. When you distill crude oil, you get two broad forms of components or distillates, and that can be classified into the lighter distillates and the heavy distillates, or the heavier distillates, whichever you fancy. Now, crude oil is classified as a heavier distillate, just like bitumen. Bitumen, I believe, is used for making roads and things like that. So now you get base oil, and then you combine that with your additives, and then you get your engine oil. What engine oil does for the engine is a couple of things. It lubricates the engine, which most people already know. It cools the engine as well. It cleans the engine and also absorbs shocks from the engine. Because you have different components in the engine that are in constant contact with each other, and they create some vibrations and shocks. And one job of the engine oil is to help absorb those vibrations as well. Speaking of base oil classification, there are actually 5 main groups of base oil, group 1 through 5. And the classification is based on a couple of factors. The first one is the amount of saturates, basically the concentration of actual base oil molecules. Okay, that's probably the most important factor that manufacturers consider when engineering engine oil. So amount of saturates is extremely important. Now viscosity index is another one, and this is different from viscosity. Viscosity index measures how viscosity changes from temperature to temperature, and this is very important because engine oil needs to be consistent when it's changing viscosity from one temperature to the other, because you operate vehicles at different temperatures, and it's very important that it has a consistency to it when you're talking about viscosity, okay? And that's the viscosity index. Now this is an undesirable factor because sulfur actually facilitates corrosion, because the sulfur mixes with hydrogen in the fuel. The fuel is a hydrocarbon, so it mixes with hydrogen, and also that mixes with the oxygen in the engine, and that causes corrosion from sulfuric acid. Now remember, acid can be corrosive, okay, and sulfuric acid is very, very corrosive. For the grouping, we have group 1 here as an example to show you. So group 1, basically anything with greater than or equal to 90% saturates, viscosity, it should be viscosity index between 80 and 120, and also 0.03% sulfur is classified group 1. So there are different, criteria for classifying these groups. The base oil selected depends on several factors, and just 2 of these factors are, what kind of engine we're going to be running this oil in. So for instance, if we're just going to be running the engine on the construction site, on a big truck that's just going to be sitting down all day and running all day, we're going to select the base oil and additives based on that, okay? And also if, this is a high performance vehicle or an everyday driver or something, all those factors go into what kind of base oil is selected. Speaking of additives are added to fluids to improve performance, okay? So in this case, we are talking about base oil additives or oil additives. There's also additives that's added to fuel, but we're just talking about oil additives for now. So if you look at this, we have anti-foaming additives. When oil is allowed to foam, you get air bubbles in it, and that reduces oil pressure, okay? And reduced oil pressure leads to accelerated engine wear, so you don't want that. Now anti-corrosion properties, I already talked about that. You have sulfur combined with oxygen and hydrogen to form sulfuric acid, which is super corrosive. And you have detergents, which the name is basically self-explanatory. It just cleans the engine. And then viscosity index improvers. You're going to be operating the vehicle under different temperatures, and you want the engine to be able to hold up. So you need the oil to be able to protect the engine under all the different conditions.
Now let's use one of these oils to explain what to look out for when purchasing engine oil. The first thing you need to understand is that engine oil needs to be made to certain specifications. Now these requirements and specifications are set by regulatory bodies, And the manufacturers of oil have to adhere to these standards if they want their oil to get the stamp of these bodies. So it's very important for manufacturers of oil that they actually engineer oil that meets these specifications. So API is American Petroleum Institute, and ILSAC is International Lubrication Standardization and Approval Committee. That's a mouthful. Now, whether or not the oil you're trying to buy is good for your diesel or petrol engine is some information that you actually find on the container. So we always strongly encourage you to read the information on the container. For this one, for instance, you can actually tell it's when you look at it, it says for gasoline engines only. Actually, for gasoline engines, which tells you that this is not fit for consumption of a diesel engine. If you put this on a diesel engine, it's not going to provide adequate protection for your diesel engine, okay? So you shouldn't do that. That's why it's extremely important that you check these things. Now, if you don't find that information easily, you can also use the API. This is called API Donut. You can use the API Donut to check, what the fit is. So this API service SN, the S in the SN stands for service, and that basically tells you this is for vehicles that use petrol or gasoline engines only. If this S was a C, that would tell you it's the commercial category, which basically means that it's for diesel engines, okay? All right, so now that we understand these categories for the oil, which is S for service and C for commercial, some people actually think of the S as spark, in that petrol engines use a spark, for ignition. So to help them remember, they use S for spark. So when you go to buy oil and you don't remember what this S means, it's service, some people just think of it as spark. And diesel engines use compression. So some people think of the C for the diesel as compression. So S for petrol engines and C for, diesel engines. Now let's move on to the requirements themselves. Okay, so SN is a requirement, and these requirements have gone through many years. So this SN is basically an API requirement. So it actually went from SA, SB, SC, SD, all the way through to SN. So as we can see from this presentation, SA started in 1930, and SN was introduced in October 2010. There's also SN Plus, which is an update to SN. So any oil that actually meets the SN Plus standard will have SN Plus in addition to the SN on the API donut. One big takeaway from this table is that even if your vehicle is 2004, what you need to understand is that there's a latest standard, and that's what you need to use. I mean, you can use an SL if you can find it for 2004, but we don't advise that because it's an old standard and it's been superseded by SN Plus in this case. So it's always best to use the latest standard, even if your vehicle is compatible with an older standard. Now moving on to the ILSAC standards. The ILSAC standards GF also started, I believe, in 1996, and it's changed several times through from GF1 through GF5, which is the current iteration of the ILSAC standard. And it actually was released in October 2010, just like the API standard SN. And basically, sometimes when you go to buy oil, you can't find API ratings on it. You can always use the GF standard as well. And GF5 is always what we recommend for our customers if they can't find any API ratings on the oil container. Now let's talk about viscosities. This stuff right here, viscosities, okay? The 0W20 and all that stuff is what you call the viscosities of the oil. Viscosities can be defined in several ways. In engineering terms, they can be defined in terms of flow rate, resistance of the fluid to shear, fluid layer friction, all that stuff. But for our purposes, we just define viscosity as just fluid thickness. That's all we need to know at this point. So basically, the higher the viscosity, the thicker the fluid, the lower the viscosity, the thinner the fluid. Now, there are actually 11 official viscosities per SAE standards. SAE stands for Society of Automotive Engineers, and it's also a regulatory body that basically sets, these viscosities, among other things. There are actually 11 official viscosities. There is 0W, there's 5W, there's 10W, there is 15W, 20W, 25W, and then there is 20, 30, 40, 50, and 60. What you're looking at here is called a multi-viscosity oil because two different viscosities have been combined into one. Now, if you look quickly at this oil I have here, this is oil for my riding lawnmower, and you can see that it's just SAE 30, so it's just one viscosity. Okay, so that tells you that this oil is thicker than what this one will ever be. Okay, so just basically depending on the kind of engine that you're running, you choose your viscosities. So that's why, vehicle manufacturers are very particular on what kind of viscosity they choose for their, their engine, because they know exactly how they made the engine and what kind of oil will work for the engine. Now let's talk about this multi-grade viscosity oil. Now, because vehicles have to operate in both cold weather and warm weather, or cold weather and an engine operating temperature, the oils that manufacturers prescribe for their vehicles should have the ability to change viscosities based on operating conditions, especially temperatures, okay? The 0W20 basically just means that zero winter, okay? The W stands for winter, and this 20 is basically the viscosity at operating temperature of the engine, which is around 100 degrees Celsius or 212 Fahrenheit. Now, what this means is that the oil should be able to operate at a zero thickness, which means that it needs to be really thin during the cold weather or winter, actually about minus 18 Celsius, which is about minus 1 Fahrenheit. That means that during the cold weather, it needs to be thin enough so that it can flow quickly to go and protect the engine when you start the engine in the cold weather. And this 20 basically means that it needs to be able to not be too thin at engine operating temperature, which is about 212. If it's too thin, it can't protect the engine. And if it's too thick here and it doesn't flow quickly, it can't protect the engine either. So it needs to have these two viscosities. That's why it's multi-viscosity, okay? So this is extremely important. In a place like Ghana, where we have, usually high temperatures, we never actually have winter. It doesn't get as cold as minus 18. But I haven't seen that before. So what that means is that if you actually have good quality SAE, for instance, if you're meant to run 020 and you use your vehicle in Ghana, and you can find SAE oil that is SAE 20, and it has all the standards that it needs to have, you can actually run SAE 20 oil because you don't have winter. Okay, so that's one thing you need to understand. This is the winter specification, but you need to make sure you check your manual to make sure you are choosing the right oil to start with. So that's very, very important. But just something I need to understand is that this factor here is really for winter. It would be good for you to put exactly what is required in it, but if you can't find 020 and you can actually find SAE 20, for instance, for your vehicle again in Ghana, you can actually run SAE 20 if it passes all the other standards. It needs to meet, like we said, the GF5 standard or the API SN. So if you can find all these things, then you can run a straight SAE 20 instead of worrying about the 0W. I hope this makes sense. So folks, this wraps up our video. Thank you for watching. And remember, don't text and drive, don't drink and drive, and always practice defensive driving. Take care.